The first thing Marcus Bell heard that morning was not the lift humming above Bay 3. It was not the old compressor kicking hard in the back room. It was Harold Whitcomb's voice cutting across the garage like a rusted blade. Pack your tools and leave. Marcus stood beside a silver Buick with its hood raised, one hand still resting on the fender, the other holding a clipboard with a work order clipped to the front. He had grease on his sleeve, a small burn mark near his collar, and the steady eyes of a man who had learned not to let every insult reach his bones. Harold Whitcomb came in wearing a navy blazer too clean for a repair shop and brown loafers that clicked against the concrete like he wanted the floor to know he owned it. His face was red. His finger was out. He pointed so close to Marcus's chest that the old men sitting in the waiting chairs stopped sipping their coffee. "This lease is done!" Harold shouted. "I want you out today." Behind Harold stood his wife, Elaine, holding a white envelope against her sweater. She looked less angry than frightened. Her eyes kept moving from Marcus to Harold, then to the office door, then back to the envelope as if paper could burn through skin. Marcus did not raise his voice. He only looked at Harold and said, "Mr. Whitcomb, rent is paid through Friday." Harold laughed like Marcus had told a joke in church. "Rent?" he said. "You think rent makes you important?" The garage went quiet. Bay 2 held a lifted Tahoe with the front wheels off. Bay 3 had the Buick. The red tool chest by the wall still had a dent from the winter. Marcus dropped a transmission mount and caught it before it cracked a customer's foot. The painted sign above the office door still said Bell Precision Auto in blue letters, even though Harold owned the building and reminded Marcus of it every chance he got. Harold stepped closer. "My building, my rules." There it was. The little sentence he liked to use. He had said it when Marcus asked for the cracked roof to be patched before rainwater dripped into the electrical box. He had said it when Marcus painted over graffiti on the back wall with his own money. He had said it when customers started coming from 2 counties over and Harold decided the garage suddenly looked valuable. "My building, my rules." Marcus heard it, swallowed it, and stood still. If you have ever been underestimated by somebody who smiled while taking the money you earned, stay with this story. And if you are listening from Detroit, Atlanta, Memphis, Baltimore, Houston, or any town where working people keep buildings alive while other people collect checks, go ahead and subscribe. Tell me where you are listening from, because somebody in your city knows a Marcus Bell. In 4 minutes, Harold Whitcomb would learn why the mortgage company had been calling his house all week. In 4 minutes, Elaine would open that envelope with shaking hands. In 4 minutes, every man in that garage would understand that Harold was not evicting a tenant. He was cutting the rope that held his own roof up. But before that white paper came out, before Harold's face lost its color, before the whole room filled with a silence deep enough to drown pride, Marcus remembered the first time he ever walked into that building. 12 years earlier, it had not looked like a business. It looked like a place people had given up on. The front glass was cloudy from old tape marks. The office smelled like mouse droppings and stale cigarettes. The concrete floor had 3 dark oil stains that no mop could touch. A broken vending machine leaned near the bathroom door with a handwritten sign taped to it that said OUTOF RDR in red marker. Marcus had been 31 then, with 1 pair of good boots, a used socket set, and a tool bag held together with black tape. He had not come in acting like a man with options. He had come in with a folded lease application, a cashier's check for the deposit, and a prayer his mother used to whisper when bills stacked higher than groceries. "Lord, let honest work find a door." Harold had owned the building even then, but he did not see a future garage. He saw a black mechanic with tired eyes and cheap tools. He saw somebody useful, somebody desperate, somebody he could squeeze. "You sure you can handle commercial rent?" Harold had asked, walking around Marcus like he was inspecting a used car. Marcus had looked past him at the empty bays. "I can handle work," he said. Harold smirked. "Work is not ownership." Marcus nodded once. "No, sir, but it is where ownership starts." Harold did not like that answer, but he liked the cashier's check. He liked it enough to hand over 1 brass key, 1 garage door remote with a cracked button, and a lease that gave Marcus the right to occupy the space as long as rent came on time. And rent came on time. Every month. Rain, snow, slow season, tax season, Christmas season. Marcus paid. He repaired alternators for single mothers who could only afford half up front. He stayed late for truck drivers passing through town. He rebuilt engines with gospel, playing low from the office radio. He swept the bays himself after midnight, then drove home with his hands smelling like brake cleaner, eating gas station peanuts because dinner could wait. Nothing about Marcus Bell looked powerful. That was how people missed him. Marcus lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east side, where the dryers shook the floor every evening like distant thunder. His couch had a fitted sheet tucked around the cushions because the vinyl had split down the middle. His kitchen table wobbled unless he folded a piece of cardboard under the short leg. He drank coffee from a mug with a hairline crack near the handle and ate cereal out of it on mornings when the bowl was still in the sink. He was not ashamed of any of it. He had learned early that shame was expensive. It made people buy what they could not afford just to impress folks who would not help them keep it. His mother, Ruth Bell, taught him that. Ruth had cleaned offices downtown for 26 years. She left before sunrise with a canvas lunch bag and came home smelling like lemon cleaner, paper dust, and bus exhaust. She wore soft church shoes even on weekdays because her feet ached too bad for anything else. When Marcus was a boy, he used to sit at the kitchen table while she counted bills in piles. Rent, lights, bus pass, groceries. Then she would take a pencil and write numbers in the margin of an old church bulletin, subtracting and circling and carrying ones like she was solving a mystery. "Numbers talk, baby," she told him once. "Most folks just don't listen till the shouting starts." Marcus listened. By 15, he could tell when the light bill was wrong. By 17, he was helping neighbors figure out why a car note had 2 late fees on it. By 20, he was working at a tire shop during the day and taking bookkeeping classes at the community college at night. Not because he planned to wear a tie, but because he wanted to understand every paper a working man was asked to sign. That was the part nobody saw when they looked at his coveralls. They saw grease. They saw tired hands. They saw a man who knew engines. They did not see the little black ledger he kept in the top drawer of his desk. The ledger had a cracked spine and pages filled with careful handwriting. Every rent payment, every repair expense, every part bought wholesale, every deposit from a fleet customer. Every dollar Marcus had put into Harold's building without being asked. Paint for the waiting room, new locks after the back door jammed, a replacement motor for the garage opener, a commercial sink because Harold said plumbing was tenant responsibility, even when the old sink had been rusting before Marcus ever turned a key. Marcus wrote it all down. Not angrily, accurately. On Sunday mornings, before church, he would sit in that tiny apartment with his mother's old pencil box beside him and enter receipts while the laundromat machines hummed below. Sometimes he would pause over a number and hear Ruth's voice in his memory. "Don't argue with loud people when paper can speak for you." He kept that sentence close. He kept it closer than pride. At Bell Precision Auto, the customers did not come for fancy chairs or free espresso. They came because Marcus told the truth. If a widow needed brake pads but not rotors, he said so. If a dealership quoted $3,000 for a repair that needed 1 sensor and an hour of labor, Marcus showed the part, showed the code, and charged clean. That made people loyal. Mrs. Donnelly brought him pound cake every Easter because he fixed her Crown Victoria the winter her son forgot to check the coolant. Deacon Price from New Hope Baptist sent every church van to Marcus after one Sunday morning when the old blue Ford refused to start and Marcus got it running in his dress shirt before choir rehearsal ended. Truckers came, teachers came, nurses came after double shifts. Men who had been talked down to at dealerships came and stood beside Marcus while he showed them exactly what was wrong. The shop became more than rented space. It became a place where people felt they would not be lied to. That was why Harold noticed. At first, Harold barely came around. He cashed the checks and complained only when the envelope was 1 day late because the post office delayed it. But after the 5th year, Harold started walking through the garage with a different look in his eye. Not landlord eyes, counting eyes. He saw the full bays. He saw customers waiting. He saw the new sign. He saw Marcus's name on the work shirts and the invoices and the thank you cards taped behind the counter. Then he saw something else. He saw rent he thought should have been higher. One Friday afternoon, Harold stepped into the office while Marcus was replacing receipt paper in the printer. "You've done pretty well for yourself," Harold said. Marcus nodded. "God's been kind. People have been loyal." Harold looked around the office, at the clean chairs and framed licenses and the small coffee station Marcus had bought after a customer fainted from low blood sugar one summer. "This building made you," Harold said. Marcus slid the printer closed. "No, sir," he said gently. "Work made this building useful." Harold's smile froze. Marcus did not mean it as an insult. That was the trouble with truth. It did not need anger to leave a mark. After that day, Harold started changing. He raised small complaints: a sign permit, parking lines, the dumpster lid, the color of the office door. He mentioned market rent like he had discovered a new Bible verse. Marcus kept working. He kept writing numbers. He kept paying. Nothing about his calm announced what he carried. That was the strength. People underestimated plainness because plainness does not perform. It simply endures, records, and waits. By the 8th year, Harold Whitcomb had a new habit. He started bringing people through the garage without warning. Men in polished shoes. A woman with a tablet. A young real estate agent who kept calling the service bays flex space and redevelopment potential. They walked past customers like customers were furniture. They looked at the lift posts, the ceiling height, the parking lot, the corner access from Route 17. They whispered near the soda machine and measured the back wall with their eyes. Marcus watched from under hoods and said nothing. He knew what a hungry man looked like. Harold was hungry, but not in the way Marcus had ever been hungry. Marcus had known the kind of hunger that made you stretch chicken soup with rice and drink water before bed. Harold's hunger was cleaner and colder. It wore a blazer. It wanted more because enough felt like losing. One Tuesday in March, Harold came in while Marcus was balancing invoices. "I've had an offer," Harold said. Marcus looked up. "For the building?" "For the property," Harold corrected. "There's a difference." Marcus waited. Harold tapped the counter with 2 fingers. "A national tire chain is interested. They can pay triple what you pay." Marcus glanced toward the bays. Mr. Alvarez's plumbing van sat in Bay 1. A nurse's Honda sat in Bay 2. The church van sat outside with its hood up, waiting on a belt. "My lease runs another 9 months, Marcus said. Harold's face tightened. "Leases can be negotiated." "Yes, sir," Marcus said. "By both sides." Harold leaned over the counter. "Don't get clever with me." Marcus closed the ledger softly. "I'm not being clever." Harold looked toward the waiting area where 2 customers pretended not to listen. "You people get comfortable real quick," he said. The words dropped heavy. Nobody moved. Marcus felt something rise in him, old and hot, but he put one hand flat on the counter and let it pass through without steering him. His mother used to say anger was a match, useful for lighting a stove, dangerous in a dry field. So Marcus only said, "I'll keep honoring the agreement." Harold smiled that thin landlord smile. "My building, my rules." That sentence again. Only this time, it sounded less like pride and more like fear. Because Harold had problems Marcus did not yet know about. The Whitcomb house on Sycamore Lane had a wide porch, white columns, and a second mortgage Harold had taken out during a bad stretch when his hardware store failed. He had refinanced twice. He had borrowed against the garage building once. Then again. Then one more time, after telling Elaine it was temporary. He never told her that Marcus's rent was not extra income anymore. It was the payment that kept the bank quiet. Every first week of the month, Marcus's check landed. Harold deposited it, and the mortgage company stopped calling. It had been that way for years. Harold had built his pride on top of Marcus's steadiness, and then convinced himself the floor belonged to him. By spring, the floor had started to crack. Taxes went up. Insurance went up. The hardware store debt had not disappeared. Harold missed one payment, then covered it late. Missed another, then juggled it with a credit line. Elaine noticed letters arriving with urgent red print. Harold told her it was nothing. "It's business," he said. "I know what I'm doing." But fear makes arrogant people meaner. Harold began showing up every week. He complained about oil spots in a garage. He complained about cars parked near a garage. He complained about customers using the restroom. He told Marcus the waiting chairs made the place look too permanent. One morning he unplugged the coffee maker, set it on the counter, and said, "This is not a diner." Marcus picked it up, plugged it back in, and said, "Customers wait here. Coffee helps." Harold's face turned red. Not for long. That afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled over the county so hard the shop lights flickered. Rain hammered the roof. Water began dripping through the old patch above the office, the same spot Marcus had reported twice. A drop hit the printer. Then another. Then the office lights blinked. Marcus moved fast. He killed power to the office circuit, pulled the printer away, grabbed a bucket, and climbed the stepladder to check the leak line. He knew the sound of water near wiring. It had a hiss to it, a small warning whisper before a big bill. Customers stood in the waiting area, nervous. Harold arrived 20 minutes later, soaked at the shoulders, furious before he crossed the threshold. Marcus met him near the office door. "We need the roof repaired properly," Marcus said. "Water is getting close to electrical." Harold looked past him at the bucket. "You trying to set me up for a claim?" "No, sir. I'm trying to protect your building and my business." Harold stepped closer, rain still shining on his hair. "You don't have a business without my building." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, quiet enough that only Harold could hear, "And you may not have a building without my business." Harold's mouth opened, but no words came. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Then the anger came back to cover it. "Friday," Harold said. Marcus frowned. "What about Friday?" Harold pointed toward the bays. "You bring your keys. You bring every remote. You clear out. I'll have a lock crew here by noon." The old compressor kicked on in the back room. The sound filled the garage like pressure building in a pipe. Marcus did not answer right away. He just looked at Harold, then at the leak, then at the customers standing beside cars he had promised to fix. Paper could speak. But first, Friday had to come. Friday came bright and cold. By 8:30, the garage was already full. A retired mail carrier waited on a thermostat repair. A delivery driver stood near the coffee station, checking his phone. Deacon Price sat in the corner chair with his cane across his knees, watching Marcus with the calm attention of a man who had seen storms gather before. Marcus worked the morning like any other morning. He finished the Buick. He called Mrs. Donnelly about her brakes. He wiped down the counter. He placed his mother's old black ledger beside the register, not open, not hidden, just there. At 11:40, Harold walked in with a locksmith behind him and Elaine at his side. Elaine had not wanted to come. Marcus could see it in her face. She held that white envelope again, pressed flat against her chest like it might keep her heart steady. Harold looked around the garage and raised his voice so everybody could hear. "All right, this ends now." Marcus came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands with a blue shop towel. "Morning, Mr. Whitcomb." Harold smiled with no warmth. "Don't morning me. Keys." Marcus folded the towel once. "Before I hand you anything, I need you to confirm something in writing." Harold laughed and turned slightly toward the customers, as if inviting them to share the joke. "You hear that? He thinks he's in charge." Marcus reached behind the counter and lifted a folder. "No, sir. I think we both signed a lease." Harold's smile snapped shut. The locksmith shifted his weight. Marcus opened the folder and placed the lease on the counter. The paper was clean, copied, highlighted at 3 places. Not angry highlighting, careful highlighting. "Section 9, Marcus said. "Notice to cure." Section 12, "Early termination." Section 16, "Landlord maintenance obligations." Harold waved a hand. "I don't need a lesson from a mechanic." Marcus looked at him. "No, sir. You need your own signature." The room went still. Marcus turned the paper so Harold could see the bottom. Harold's name sat there in blue ink from 12 years earlier, then again from the renewal 3 years after that, then again from the 5-year extension he had signed when Marcus agreed to pay for improvements up front in exchange for stable rent. Harold stared. Marcus opened the black ledger. "This is every rent payment. This is every building repair I paid after written notice. Roof patch, door motor, sink, electrical inspection after the leak, parking lot striping, security lights, all documented. Receipts, photos, dates, emails." Elaine stepped closer before she seemed to know she was moving. "Harold," she whispered, "what is he talking about?" Harold's face flushed darker. "He's trying to embarrass me." Marcus shook his head. "I'm trying to keep my business open." The front door opened again. A woman in a gray coat stepped inside, holding a tablet and a slim leather folder. She was not dressed like a customer. She walked to Elaine first, not Harold. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" she asked gently. "I'm Dana Rowe from Piedmont Community Bank. We spoke yesterday." Elaine's hands trembled. Harold spun around. "You had no right coming here." Dana looked at him with professional sadness. "Mr. Whitcomb, after your call this morning, we needed confirmation of whether the rental income tied to this property was ending today." The word rental landed hard. Marcus said nothing. Dana opened her folder. "Your mortgage modification lists this commercial lease payment as the primary income source supporting the loan." If Mr. Bell is forced out and that income stops, the account moves into default review immediately. The silence filled the garage like water rising in a tank. Harold's mouth opened, but no sound came. Elaine finally tore open the white envelope. Her eyes moved across the page. Mortgage statement. Overdue. Amount past due. A number almost exactly matching Marcus's monthly rent. Her voice broke on the first word. Harold. He reached for the paper, but she pulled it back. You told me this was handled. Harold looked at Marcus then, truly looked at him, maybe for the first time in 12 years. Not at the coveralls. Not at the grease. Not at the black mechanic he thought he could push until the room agreed with him. He looked at the man whose steadiness had been holding his life together. Marcus closed the ledger. You said, my building, my rules, Harold swallowed. Marcus kept his voice even. But those rules are on paper, Mr. Whitcomb. And the paper says I'm not the one breaking them. Deacon Price let out a low sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite an amen. The locksmith looked at Harold and took one step back. Dana slid a document across the counter. If you proceed with an unlawful lockout, the bank will treat it as a material change in income and collateral risk. I would advise against it. 4 minutes. That was all it took. 4 minutes from Harold demanding the keys to Harold standing in his own tenant's garage, learning that pride had been spending money humility earned. His face dropped. The room did not erupt loudly. It changed slowly. Customers straightened. Elaine lowered herself into the waiting chair. The locksmith picked up his bag without being asked. Harold stared at the lease like the signature belonged to a stranger. Marcus picked up the shop keys from the counter. For one breath, Harold thought he was handing them over. Instead, Marcus clipped them back onto his belt. Then he turned toward the Buick and said, Mrs. Donnelly's car will be ready by 2. Work resumed, and Harold had no rule left strong enough to stop it. Harold did not leave right away. Men like Harold rarely knew how to leave a room they had expected to own. He stood near the counter with his blazer hanging wrong on one shoulder, watching Marcus move through the garage as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. The air was different. The floor was different. Even the old compressor in the back seemed to run quieter, like it understood that some noise did not deserve an answer. Dana Rowe from the bank spoke softly with Elaine near the waiting chairs. The locksmith waited by the door, looking down at his work boots. Customers returned to their coffee, but their eyes kept finding Marcus. Not because he had shouted, not because he had humiliated Harold back, because he had not. That was what made the moment heavy. Marcus lifted the Buick's hood, checked the belt alignment, then closed it with both hands. He wrote the final note on Mrs. Donnelly's invoice and set the clipboard on the counter. Harold finally moved closer. His voice came out smaller than before. Marcus. Marcus turned. Yes, sir? That sir hurt Harold more than any insult could have. It had no fear in it, no begging, no bitterness. Just the old manners Ruth Bell had put in her son before the world tried to take them. Harold swallowed. I didn't know the bank had it written that way. Marcus studied him. You signed it. Elaine looked down at the envelope in her lap. Harold's eyes flickered toward the ledger. You kept all that? Yes, sir. For 12 years? Marcus nodded. My mother taught me numbers talk. Something passed across Harold's face then. Not repentance. Not yet. Maybe only the first crack in the story he had told himself. He looked toward Bay 2, where the church van sat waiting. He looked at the waiting room, at the clean chairs, at the coffee maker he had tried to unplug, at the customers who had come there because one man told the truth over and over until truth became the business model. I need time, Harold said. Marcus folded his hands in front of him. So do I. Harold looked confused. Marcus stepped behind the counter, opened a drawer, and removed a second folder. This one was thinner. I'm not asking to stay forever under bad faith, Marcus said. I'll honor the lease. You honor it too. During that time, I'll be looking for a place to buy. Elaine looked up. To buy? Marcus nodded. Yes, ma'am. Harold gave a weak laugh, but it died before it became disrespect. Marcus opened the folder and showed the first page. A pre-approval letter. Not enormous. Not flashy. Just enough. Years of clean records, customer contracts, steady deposits, and disciplined books had become something no insult could erase. Dana glanced at it and smiled. I told Mr. Bell last month he was stronger on paper than he realized. Marcus shook his head once. No, I realized. Then he touched the black ledger. I was just waiting on the right door. Deacon Price stood slowly, leaning on his cane. "Brother Marcus," he said, "that right there will preach." A small laugh moved through the garage. Not cruel, relieved. Harold lowered himself into the chair beside Elaine. For the first time all morning, he looked old. Marcus could have said many things. He could have reminded Harold of every time he had been talked down to. Every repair request ignored. Every sneer. Every "my building, my rules." He could have made Harold repeat an apology in front of everyone. But Marcus Bell had not survived by letting small men decide the size of his spirit. So he only said, "Mr. Whitcomb, I'll send the April rent by certified mail, same as always. And I'll send copies to the bank until this is settled." Harold nodded, eyes low. "Thank you." Marcus did not answer quickly. Then he said, "Take care of your wife." Elaine covered her mouth. That was the part people remembered. Not the paperwork. Not the bank officer. Not even the overdue mortgage notice circled in everybody's memory like a red warning light. They remembered that after being embarrassed, threatened, and nearly thrown out of the place his labor had rescued, Marcus still found the cleanest sentence in the room. By 2 o'clock, Mrs. Donnelly picked up her Buick. By 3, the church van was running. By 5, Marcus swept the floor himself, the same way he always had. Long, steady strokes. Dust into a pile. Loose bolts into a tray. Nothing wasted. Nothing ignored. Before locking up that evening, he stood under the sign above the office door. Bell Precision Auto. For 12 years, people had walked into Harold's building and found Marcus's character. That was the truth Harold missed. A deed can name an owner, but work gives a place its soul. Marcus turned off the lights bay by bay. In the quiet, he could almost hear Ruth Bell at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, saying what she had always said. Numbers talk. And this time, everybody had listened. If you have ever been underestimated, tell me below. What did they fail to see in you? And if you believe quiet, people can still win with dignity, subscribe for the next story. Because next time, a hotel manager laughs at an old housekeeper's broken English until the guest in room 904 asks for her by name.